Everyone harbors one or two secrets they'd rather keep hidden. I'm no exception. Back in the day, I was quite the wild child. Losing my parents at 15, I quickly went astray and joined a gang of troublemakers. Thanks to my dad's insistence on teaching me wrestling since childhood, I gained a reputation for overwhelming strength, surpassing even the boys. However, my life in that world came to an end after meeting a certain person. But living such a life inevitably accumulates lingering issues. Now, at 35, my name is Nancy. I live as an ordinary housewife, working at a local supermarket. With my light makeup and quiet demeanor, no one would guess that I once wore flashy makeup and rode around on motorcycles. Yes, I was a member of a delinquent group and even the leader of a ladies' gang. But then I met my husband, Joshua, and everything changed. It all started 10 years ago during a clash with a rival gang when Joshua unexpectedly intervened. That gang used to start fights at every gathering, and one day, a particularly fierce brawl broke out. Joshua joined in to save his brother, a member of the rival gang. As members of both groups fell, Joshua and I were the last ones standing. I even remember Joshua laughing at his mistake, realizing his brother wasn't even there. His dignified appearance somehow struck me, and I found myself speaking to him. "Hey, you're pretty cool. I mean, really, looking like this, you must have some strange tastes. Were you calling out for someone named No? Did you find him?" I asked. "No, it turns out my brother wasn't here," he replied. That's how our slow, private conversation began. Joshua's brother, it seems, was an irredeemable delinquent. Joshua had even taken up boxing to try to reform him. He admitted he couldn't stand to ignore wrongdoing. Through our conversation, we grew close, and over time, it became clear that we had feelings for each other. But back then, Joshua despised delinquents. Despite our mutual attraction, my involvement in the delinquent world prevented our relationship from progressing. Finally, Joshua said that if I left the gang for good, he'd want to be with me. Tired of the senseless fights, I took the opportunity to leave the group. We started dating and got married 5 years later. The group I was part of disbanded, crushed by a rival faction 2 years after. After marrying Joshua, I underwent a complete transformation, evolving into a calm and graceful woman. However, our peaceful life was recently threatened by a certain neighbor, Joshua's sister, Sonia, and her husband. One morning, as I was seeing Joshua off to work, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? I thought, and I decided to check. The next moment, Joshua looked surprised. "It's Sonia," he mentioned, referring to his sister, whom I had met once at a family dinner. "Hey, Joshua, we've moved next door starting today. Please take care of us." "Hello, I'm Tony, Sonia's husband. Well, looking forward to your cooperation," they both greeted, starting off with a disrespectful attitude. But since Sonia was Joshua's sister, I couldn't be too confrontational. We got along well with the in-laws, so I didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. However, it turned out that Tony was the person who lured Joshua's brother, Noah, into the delinquent world. They both went to the same high school and were a year junior to Joshua. Joshua turned 34 this year, so they must be 33. Sonia, 3 years younger than Joshua, should be 31. "Too bad about your brother, huh, Tony?" Sonia remarked. "I don't care about Noah anymore, even you, Joshua," she continued. Joshua was visibly angry. His brother had passed away due to a fight. Joshua's brother and sister apparently never got along well. Sonia felt neglected in favor of her brother and developed a rivalry, which eventually extended to Joshua as well. Joshua once mentioned how difficult it was to deal with his sister, preferring to focus only on his brother. Like me, Sonia was also a former member of a delinquent group. Unlike her, Noah was forcibly recruited by Tony. Seeing his siblings' transformation, Joshua probably grew even stronger in his sense of justice. As the three of them glared at each other, I spoke up from behind Joshua. "Joshua, you need to leave for work soon." He snapped out of his reverie. "Oh, right." Running away, he muttered, remembering his responsibilities. "I haven't forgotten that you laid hands on me. That was because you attacked Noah. All right, both of you, enough. We're done here." Sonia's words cut through the tension. Joshua left for work, the conflict still unresolved. At the same time, the bell tolling the start of Sonia and her husband's harassment began. An hour after Joshua left for work, the doorbell rang, but when I checked, no one was there. An hour later, there was a loud noise at the entrance, as if something was violently placed there. When I looked, there was a heap of cardboard boxes dumped in front of the door. What's this about? I muttered to myself, but no one was around. So, I decided to ignore it and went back inside. Then, I heard a small popping sound from the balcony. I hurried over and found 3 broken eggs. We live in an apartment on the corner, next to the room Sonia just moved into. This meant the harassment likely came from Sonia's room, as there are no neighbors on one side and it's too high for someone from below. Anger rising, I confronted my next-door neighbors. "Hey, is that you? What do you want, showing up like this?" I demanded. Sonia greeted me with an irritable demeanor. "Is this your idea of a prank, throwing eggs on our balcony?" It had to be Sonia or her husband. The angle only made sense from Sonia's balcony. But Sonia glared at me, replying, "What? Don't be absurd, lady. You got proof we did it. Make false accusations and I'll call the cops." Despite being a former gang member, her reliance on the police in such a situation seemed second-rate to me. "I have no proof, but the way the eggs are scattered, they could only come from your balcony," I asserted, frustration evident in my voice. I struggled to remain calm, but Sonia kept glaring and arguing back. "Proof? That's weak," she scoffed. Then Tony chimed in. Hey, just because you're Joshua's wife doesn't mean you'll get any special treatment." If Sonia was second-rate, Tony's words were no better. He might have thought he was intimidating, but to me, it was not frightening at all. I could feel my old self stirring, but I didn't want to revert to my past. So I played the role of a meek, unassuming woman and said quietly, "Please don't raise your voice." Inwardly, I wanted to deliver a roundhouse kick right then and there to snap that foolish neck. But having reformed after meeting Joshua, I didn't want to throw away all my efforts for something like this. Seeing my reaction, they both burst into laughter in front of me. "Aha, so you're Joshua's wife. I thought you'd be something special, but you're just a dull woman," Sonia sneered. "Weak. Tony was giving you too much credit. At the family dinner, you seemed like a real introvert." Holding back my rising anger, I was told, "Go on, leave," and the door was closed on me. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. I pondered telling Joshua, but I knew that even if he spoke to Sonia, they'd just feign ignorance. It would only result in more harassment and frustration for me, so I decided against it. The next day and the day following, the harassment from Sonia and her husband continued. It always began after Joshua left for work. "Who dumped this garbage at our doorstep? It must be those two," I muttered to myself as I prepared to leave for work at the supermarket. The door got stuck halfway, blocked by a bag of garbage. I reluctantly took it to the disposal area and then headed to work. 5 hours later, I returned home to find something unbelievable. There was a cardboard box in front of the door, arranged like a table. On either side of the box, lit candles were placed, and in the center, a vase with flowers was set on the door. Above, a photo of me, taken who knows when, was stuck. They were mocking me as if I was deceased. Furious, I was about to kick the cardboard away when Joshua called from behind. Startled, I turned around to find Joshua, who had come home from work. "You're an hour early," I exclaimed. "I got off work early today. What's all this?" Joshua was also surprised at the sight in front of the door. We quickly cleaned up the cardboard and candles from the shared hallway and went inside. There, I told Joshua everything that had happened. "It's likely Sonia and her husband, but we don't have any proof. So even if we confront them, they'll just deny it," I explained. After a moment of thought, Joshua had an idea. "Let's buy cameras, one for the balcony and one for the entrance, especially hidden well at the entrance," he suggested. I agreed with Joshua's suggestion. There was a limit to how much more we could endure. We immediately purchased cameras online and had them delivered to Joshua's workplace to avoid suspicion. For now, we'll just have to endure until the cameras arrive. Then we can retaliate with evidence. "Understood," Joshua said firmly. So, I bore the harassment from Sonia's house for the next couple of days. For most people, endurance means being unable to fight back due to lack of strength or fear. But for me, it was different. I was holding back the urge to retaliate in a world where using force was permissible. I would have already intervened with those two if I could, but not being able to act on it was incredibly frustrating. 3 days later, Joshua came home with the cameras. "Any trouble since?" he asked. "The usual. Today they even threw a fish head onto the balcony," I replied. Let's set up the cameras right away. Put one behind the air conditioning unit on the balcony, aiming at Sonia's balcony. We'll hide another near the fire extinguisher by the entrance. The day after installing the cameras, Sonia's antics started again as Joshua left for work. I monitored everything through a recording app. Sure enough, the two of them began their antics. I silently observed and left for work when it was time. 2 hours into my shift at the supermarket, Sonia lined up at my register. Well, if it isn't my sister-in-law, she said with a tone that made it clear she knew it was me, her demeanor dripping with condescension. I silently scanned the items as Sonia continued. Aren't you a bit cold for a cashier? Shouldn't you be more hospitable? Come on, give me a discount on this. Other customers lined up behind Sonia, watching our interaction with concerned expressions. Hey, I'm not a scarecrow, you know, a middle-aged man in line spoke up to Sonia. Can't you see she's uncomfortable? Sonia whirled around, glaring fiercely. Shut up. It's none of your business, she suddenly yelled at him. The man seemed completely deflated by Sonia's outburst and quietly left the line. I then addressed Sonia for the first time. Ma'am, if you continue to behave inappropriately, I'll have to call security. I spoke in a calm but icy tone, perhaps mindful of the others watching. Sonia retorted, Geez, it's just a joke. So disappointing, and left the store, abandoning her items halfway through the transaction. The other customers stared in astonishment. My anger was just about to boil over when I returned home after work. There was a notice on the door. Useless cashier. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I ripped off the note in frustration and waited anxiously for Joshua to return. After Joshua got home, we reviewed the footage from the cameras. It clearly recorded Sonia and her husband's misdeeds. Now we can fight back. All right, let's go now. Anger filled Joshua's eyes. When we rang Sonia's doorbell, Tony answered. You two again. What do you want this time? Sonia appeared behind them. What do you want, Joshua? The two of them asked lazily. We finally began our counterattack. You two. As I started to speak, Joshua stopped me and stepped forward. I recounted. Nancy, let me handle this. Sonia and Tony were taken aback as Joshua continued. If you harass us any further, it won't end well for you. Tony retorted. What? You want to fight? Do you even have proof we did anything? Before Tony could finish, Joshua started playing the video saved in the recording app. This is video capturing your wrongdoings. We had to install cameras because your harassment was too much. This silenced the usually talkative pair. Sonia, showing a hint of panic, turned to Tony. Tony, frowning deeply, glared back at us. Damn it, you got us this time. The trouble started from your end, remember? I said with a serious face. Tony retorted, so we settle this with force, huh? Wait there, Joshua. I'm calling someone. Call whoever you want. We'll be ready. Joshua stood firm, undeterred as the situation escalated. Tony desperately pleaded into the phone. William, I need backup now. His tone was completely different from the bravado he showed us, repeatedly begging for help. After hanging up, he turned back to us. Get ready, Willie. The most notorious guy around here is on his way. He smirked at us, convinced of his imminent victory. But relying on someone else's strength showed his true cowardice. Why don't you confront us directly? Joshua challenged. Keep talking. I know your strength well. I called a special guest this time to ensure you both feel real terror. What a pitiful sight it was. No matter how much they threatened, neither Joshua nor I felt any fear. You must be too scared to even speak. The quiet and meek Nancy, right? Sonia taunted me with a condescending tone. 5 minutes later, the much-bragged about William arrived. However, he looked surprised when he saw us. William, over here. Long time no see, Joshua greeted him. Sonia and Tony were visibly excited, having high expectations of him, but their expectations were quickly shattered. What's going on here? Indeed, long time no see, Will. My calling him left Sonia and Tony with puzzled expressions. Joshua also greeted him. It's been a while, Will. The couple looked even more confused by this interaction. Confused? Tony asked. What's this? How do you know, William? As Tony spoke with sweat on his forehead, Will looked back and forth between us. I simply said to him, well, let's not do this, okay? Hearing this, an angry Tony retorted, don't joke around, William. Please do something. Sonia and Tony were frantic, unable to grasp the situation. But then Will addressed them. Hey, don't tell me you mess with Nancy. His question left the couple momentarily stunned. So what if we did? Tony answered hesitantly. Furious, Will shouted, "Idiots! Don't you know who you're messing with?" His rebuke left them standing frozen. They clearly had no idea what was going on. Seeing this, I turned to Joshua and said, "Hey, Joshua, I reverted to my old self from 15 years ago, just for now." Instead of Joshua, it was Will who turned and responded, "Nancy, please don't. If you do something to them, it might end up more than just an injury." Will cautioned me. "What, you're giving me orders now?" I replied, taken aback. No, I didn't mean it like that," he quickly clarified. Seeing the special guests they called for help, Sonia and Tony were bewildered. "What's happening here?" Their faces turned pale as Will spoke. "Do you two know about BBN?" he asked. "Yeah, it's famous. It stands for Black Butterfly Nancy, right? The nickname of the former leader of a ladies' group," Sonia confirmed. "That's right, and this lady here is Nancy herself," Will revealed. Sonia and Tony were shocked. "No way, really?" They both lost their bravado in an instant. Continuing, Will said, "Back then, I led another delinquent group, but we were decimated by Nancy's group. She could take down 30 people by herself." Sonia and Tony now looked at me fearfully. It made sense. They had been harassing someone who they thought was inferior, only to find out she was the leader of a ladies' group they themselves had once belonged to. "I didn't know Nancy is practically a legend," Sonia admitted. "We joined the group 6 months after you left," Sonia said, indicating that she and Tony had joined the group half a year after I had left. Will had been scouted by me and stayed in the group even after my departure. And looking after Sonia and Tony as their senior, he left the group just before it was decimated by a rival group. By that time, Tony had taken over as the leader and was the last leader before its downfall. "Before you ruined it, it was an invincible group. You can't match Nancy," Tony proclaimed. "How could this? Tony was increasingly cornered and distressed by Will's revelations. "Well, the group that took you down is now the strongest in New York State. But if Nancy was still active, she would still be the strongest," Will remarked. Sonia and Tony collapsed, their spirits broken. Seeing this, Will turned to me and apologized. "Please forgive them for my sake." Watching Will apologize, Sonia and Tony had completely lost their will to fight. They never imagined their call for help would backfire this way. "All right, but you'll have to settle your dues properly," I glared at the two of them. "For 1 month, you'll clean this apartment and our balcony that you dirtied. If you skip even 1 day, I won't be so forgiving next time." "Okay," Sonia managed to stutter out her agreement, completely intimidated. Tony, unable to speak, just kept nodding frantically. Watching them, Will commented, "No one can really stand up to Nancy." Hearing this, the silent Joshua finally spoke, "But I hate delinquents. If Nancy hadn't reformed, I wouldn't be here." Looking down a bit, Joshua said softly, and I peered up at him. "Don't worry, I won't show that side of me again." Will burst into laughter at this scene, and we all ended up laughing together. Will and Joshua knew each other because the three of us had met after I left the group. We bumped into Will while on a date and had tea together. "Well, now that's settled, why don't you come over for dinner?" I suggested. We three left Sonia and Tony slumped by the entrance and headed to our apartment. Before entering, Joshua added, "Sonia, you're my sister, so I'll let this slide just this once. But there won't be a next time." Watching him, I wondered if he too was hiding the same fighting spirit as us. From that day, the harassment from Sonia and her husband completely stopped. As promised, I continued cleaning our balcony and the common areas of the apartment, but just delinquents doing chores. Other residents sometimes looked at them curiously, but that soon stopped. After a month, Sonia and her husband left the apartment without a word. Even Joshua, their blood relative, didn't know where they went. They probably left feeling awkward about staying in the same place. We had no reason to get involved further and thought they finally made a wise decision. Finally, we had our peaceful life back. Though neighborhood troubles are common, I never thought I'd be directly involved. At least it was resolved amicably. I have a past I'd rather keep hidden. Joshua has kept it secret all this time. I'm not ashamed of all my past, but I have reflected on my mistakes. I just want to cherish my life with Joshua now, and I hope to live without ever showing my true nature to anyone again. That's all I'm thinking about now.
A huge renovation for elder care? $30,000? What's going on? Wait, isn't that my wife's parents' house? Then, I get this strange call from someone claiming to be my estranged sister-in-law's husband. Something doesn't add up here. It seems like my sister-in-law might be plotting something. Hi, I'm Martha, a 56-year-old stay-at-home wife. My kids are grown and out of the house now, so it's just me, my husband, and my in-laws living together. Thankfully, I have a good relationship with them, which is nice since I lost my own parents when I was young. With the kids gone, my husband and I are finally enjoying some freedom from parenting duties. When my husband and I tied the knot, we knew we'd eventually share a home with his parents. However, my mother-in-law, who had a rough time with her own mother-in-law, had her house turned into a two-family home for us. Even though we live under the same roof, we each have our own space, which has probably helped our relationship flourish. While my husband is at work during the day, I'd often hang out with my in-laws. One day, while my father-in-law was busy with farm chores, I was fixing lunch in the kitchen, planning for us to enjoy it outside. Suddenly, a call came from one of my father-in-law's farming buddies, informing us that he had fallen and broken a bone. He had already been rushed to the family doctor in a pickup truck. My mother-in-law and I abandoned the food and hurried to the hospital. When we got there, emergency surgery was in progress. Despite seeming healthy, my father-in-law was in his 80s, so bouncing back from a fracture wouldn't be easy. The doctors warned us to brace for the worst, possibly even needing a wheelchair. So that's what they meant. As long as he pulls through, that's all that matters. I'll be there to support him, I vowed. We sat anxiously, hearts heavy with prayers, as the surgery dragged on. By the time my husband finished work and joined us, the surgery was over, and we breathed a collective sigh of relief seeing my father-in-law peacefully sleeping in his hospital room, free of any major complications. We decided to rally around him together from then on. But our hopes were dashed when, just a month later, my father-in-law passed away suddenly. His age had left him vulnerable, and he succumbed to an infection that took hold after the surgery. With many of his friends and family also elderly, we hesitated to burden them with news of the wake and funeral. After much discussion, we settled on a private family funeral. Yet even in death, there were unresolved tensions. What about my sister-in-law? I raised the question to my mother-in-law and husband, both wearing expressions of disapproval, likely remembering her troubled marriage, which they had vehemently opposed. While my husband didn't share their strong opposition, he couldn't fully embrace the idea either. This created a strain, causing their relationship with their daughter to become distant. Still, she was their flesh and blood. Shouldn't she have the chance to bid her final farewell? Eventually, they relented, agreeing that if we could reach her, she could attend. But our attempts to contact her proved futile, and the funeral proceeded without her presence. It's just the way things are with her. It's fate. Don't dwell on it, Martha. My mother-in-law comforted me, gently patting my shoulder as we made our way home from the crematorium with my father-in-law's ashes. His sudden passing left us all reeling, without any mental preparation for the funeral and cremation process. As we clasped his ashes and lit incense, the days that followed were filled with a sense of emptiness. It's easier when my husband is here. We can lean on each other. But when he's at work, the silence becomes unbearable. So I find solace in my mother-in-law's company. I know she's enduring even greater pain and sorrow than I am. After all, she lost the husband she'd been with for so many years in the blink of an eye. Even if it's just a facade, I make an effort to maintain a cheerful demeanor around her, I admitted. But my mother-in-law surprised me with her pragmatism. I had planned to keep things this way until the 49th day. However, yes, we can go through his belongings later. But I'm already over 80. You look remarkably young for your age, mother-in-law. Rarely ill, she'd often mention her only hospitalization being childbirth, indicating her robust health. Essentially, she assured us not to worry about her. You're very kind, Martha. But while I'm still mobile, I'd like to organize our things, including his, she insisted. I understand the sentiment of wanting to preserve important memories, like your father-in-law's belongings. Just let me know if you need assistance, I offered. She promptly asked for help retrieving items out of her reach. As we sifted through old photos of my father-in-law, she fondly recalled their youth, sharing tales of their adventures. I listened attentively, nodding along. When the phone rang, my mother-in-law, who didn't own a smartphone, relied on the landline for communication. I wonder who that could be. Only a few close friends knew our situation, and I thought they might avoid calling once they knew. But it might be urgent. I'll answer it. Considering her difficulty in moving, I decided to answer the phone myself rather than inconvenience her. I quickly reached for the receiver near the entrance, greeted by a polite voice I didn't recognize, introducing himself as my sister-in-law's husband. However, I had never crossed paths with him before, leaving me uncertain if he truly was who he claimed to be. As I listened, pondering if this was a new scam targeting the elderly, he broached the topic. I want to discuss the home renovation for caregiving. My father-in-law had already passed away, so why mention caregiving renovations now? Could he have mistaken my mother-in-law's situation? But she wasn't in need of such extensive care. Excuse me? Are you certain you've dialed the right number? This is my wife's family home, isn't it? The man, supposedly my sister-in-law's husband, referenced her maiden name, which indeed matched my husband's family. There was no mistaking this as their residence. Furthermore, his mention of my sister-in-law's name confirmed his authenticity. Yes, the person you mentioned is indeed my husband's sister. Thank you for your understanding. Given the difficulties our family has faced due to our troubled marriage, I feared I had made a negative impression once again. Although I wasn't privy to why my in-laws vehemently opposed my sister-in-law's marriage, this man didn't give off any negative vibes. On the contrary, he appeared genuinely humble and sincere. According to him, he had heard about the estimated $30,000 needed for caregiving renovations and was determined to make amends for the trouble he had caused. He assured us he intended to fulfill the payment, but needed an extension due to difficulty in gathering the funds by the deadline. It's awkward to have him explain everything before divulging this, but his earnestness made me falter. Thank you for your courtesy. Regarding the extension, please give me a moment. When did you learn about the caregiving renovation? My father-in-law was in good health and actively engaged in agriculture until recently. So there was no need for caregiving renovations at all. Past tense. Yes, my father-in-law passed away. We just concluded his funeral and cremation. I understand. I could almost sense his panic on the other end of the line. He must have been bewildered by the disparity between what his wife had relayed and the truth I presented. It simply didn't add up for him. Gradually, he confessed to having caused considerable distress to my in-laws. When he married into the family, he believed his wife's assertion that her father required care, and he aimed to offer financial aid as a gesture of apology for the inconvenience he had caused. He recounted this to me, seemingly sincere in his intentions. I probed how the notion of my father-in-law needing care had arisen. It emerged a few years back. Initially, he appeared to send a fixed sum each month to contribute to caregiving expenses. However, it became apparent that neither my father-in-law nor mother-in-law were aware of such arrangements. Had they known, my mother-in-law would have surely invited him to the funeral. He claimed her mother had expressed gratitude and that it had been helpful, leading me to believe I was gradually being forgiven. If you were truly forgiven, wouldn't she communicate with you? That's a valid point. Moreover, the amount of money sent annually seemed to be increasing. He had been sending more each month, assuming we had requested additional support, a request we had no memory of making. So none of this money reached you? As I confirmed, I sensed his growing frustration. It was challenging for me to articulate while also absorbing the information. I speculated that perhaps my sister-in-law. Well, I couldn't outright say you're being deceived. But he interjected, you don't need to tiptoe around it. I'm being deceived, aren't I? Unable to confirm or deny, I remained silent. He likely interpreted my silence as confirmation. Seeking guidance on how to proceed if indeed being deceived, he turned to me. While it wasn't my place to advise, I couldn't bear to abandon my sister-in-law, my husband's sibling. Despite our estrangement, I assured him we would discuss the matter and get back to him later. And with that, our conversation concluded for the day. Upon returning to my mother-in-law, she remarked, "That was quite the lengthy call. Was it one of those persistent salespeople? You know, you should just hang up on them." She assumed it was a pushy sales call. No, it was someone claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband. I replied, sharing the details of the conversation with her. Anger simmered beneath her calm facade as she listened, erupting further upon hearing the entirety of it. What kind of person is she, using her father as an excuse to extort money from her husband? My mother-in-law's hands trembled with fury. It wasn't the first time my sister-in-law had displayed financial irresponsibility, often splurging on luxury items she couldn't afford with her allowance or part-time job earnings. Her behavior seemed suspicious. When she decided to marry, her partner was a man of considerable wealth, which led her parents to vehemently oppose the union. Their opposition wasn't for the sake of my sister-in-law, but rather for her partner's well-being. We then agreed to wait at the culprit's residence with her husband for her eventual return. It had been so long since I last laid eyes on my sister-in-law. When she first introduced her then boyfriend, now husband, to her parents and brother with marriage intentions, there was quite a stir. However, as I wasn't yet formally part of the family, I wasn't present for the commotion. Hence, this would mark my initial encounter with my sister-in-law's spouse. As I had sensed during our phone conversation, he appeared genuinely sincere with a pleasant demeanor. Despite rumors of his substantial income, he didn't seem to lead an extravagant lifestyle. Instead, he appeared to opt for a more modest existence. However, if one of the reasons behind this modesty stemmed from my sister-in-law's deceit, it undoubtedly evoked a complex mix of emotions. Meeting my sister-in-law again after many years, her unexpected encounter with her mother at home left her visibly stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief as she stood frozen in place. The image I had of my sister-in-law was one of someone with a penchant for flashy things. However, the woman before me now appeared excessively ostentatious, lacking any sense of refinement, which was somewhat disheartening to witness. The three of us had agreed beforehand to play along with my sister-in-law's charade. Initially, we opted not to address her deceit directly. It's been quite some time. "I'm glad to see you're doing well," I greeted her with warmth. Caught off guard by the unexpected kindness, my sister-in-law stuttered in response to her mother, perhaps fearing her lies had been exposed, and she would face reprimand. "I've been wanting to see you again after all these years. How have you been?" We chose not to divulge the truth about her father's passing and upheld the pretense that he was still alive. I offered my apologies for not keeping in touch and exchanged pleasantries accordingly. Humbly, my sister-in-law expressed relief that her mother seemed healthy and admitted to worrying about her. However, conspicuously absent from her remarks was any mention of her father. We were keen to avoid any discussion that might inadvertently reveal the truth about her father's condition or the issue of caregiving expenses. It appeared that my husband and she had crossed paths before, yet her deception remained undetected. Perhaps she believed she could continue her charade without consequence. "Your mom seems pleased. It looks like you two are doing well together," remarked my mother-in-law. She was hopeful that her daughter would mend her ways and gradually start supporting her husband. The strategy was to shower her with praise in the hopes of prompting a change of heart. Somehow, my sister-in-law went a step too far, assuring my mother-in-law that she would provide caregiving support if needed and even insisted not to worry about finances. It's astonishing she could make such promises in front of her husband, who had been supporting her with good intentions. My heart went out to him as he listened to it all, I lamented. Expressing our gratitude, we took our leave that day. Judging from her actions, it seemed probable that my sister-in-law had been diverting the money she requested for her own use. Uncertain of where the hefty sum of $30,000 had disappeared to, we opted to hire a private investigator to delve into her financial affairs. The monthly caregiving funds, totaling several $1,000s, were evidently being redirected for her personal benefit. However, what unfolded was a shocking revelation. She was deeply entangled with a favored club host, lavishing him with financial support in a bid to elevate his status. Her extravagant spending included purchasing costly bottles and accumulating debts she couldn't settle each month. As the host faced mounting pressure to settle his unpaid bills, amounting to $30,000, my sister-in-law's husband was incensed, realizing he could no longer turn a blind eye. He meticulously orchestrated his plans while she was away on a trip with her preferred host, oblivious to the unfolding events. Upon returning home a few days later, she was met with a stark reality. Her house was devoid of furniture or personal belongings, leaving her in a state of panic, frantically attempting to reach her husband to no avail. She eventually contacted me in distress. Initially hysterical, she immediately quieted down when I nonchalantly inquired about her trip with the club host. Unable to question how I was aware of her actions without admitting guilt, she found herself at a loss for words. Now it was my turn to confront her, leaving no room for rebuttal. Your deception hasn't gone unnoticed. You've betrayed not only your mother and husband, but also shattered any trust others may have had in you. Furthermore, the father-in-law you exploited as an excuse has passed away. It wasn't entirely her fault for being unaware of her father's passing, but using his supposed care as a pretext to solicit money was unquestionably wrong. I made it clear that her ex-husband was also privy to the truth, and upon realizing she had been abandoned, she erupted into a fit of screams over the phone, resembling a person unhinged. Refusing to engage with her ex-husband and unwilling to burden my elderly mother-in-law further, I volunteered to act as an intermediary with my sister-in-law. Despite her continued protests over the phone, she evoked pity in a way, oblivious to her father's demise and exploiting him as a means to an end. Though she might harbor regrets, it was too late for remorse. I delivered one final message to her. Your ex-husband intends to demand full repayment for the money you squandered on the host. You'll need to find a way to settle the $30,000 debt on your own. Subsequently, she received legal documents from a lawyer. Despite her request to speak with her husband, he remained resolute, unable to stomach any interaction with his ex-wife, even for legal proceedings. With no room for negotiation, my sister-in-law was left to eke out a modest living while grappling with the weight of her debts. Naturally timid, she lived in perpetual fear of the lawyer's notices and the unwelcome visits from debt collectors. As for us, we resumed our ordinary lives. While it took some time to sift through my father-in-law's belongings, we resolved to move forward as a family, including his share. Recently, my mother-in-law has begun showing signs of decline, hinting that the day she'll require care may be nearing. Since we couldn't do much for my father-in-law, my husband, and I pledged to do our utmost for my mother-in-law. I spent $200,000. Kenny, who didn't even come to my mom's funeral, had suddenly flown overseas. $200,000. What did you do with all that money? Remember our nice piano at home? I sold the dude. Being from a rich family has its perks. It was a good piano. I never thought it would sell for $200,000. Kenny thought the piano at home was his, but he was wrong. My condolences. I get all the inheritance from the family estate. But that piano was actually bought by our grandpa for my brother, so it's still his. My brother loves that piano and teaches piano now. He left it at our house because it's too big for his place. If my brother finds out we sold it without asking him, he'll be really mad. Just giving him money won't fix it. When I told Kenny this, he hung up right away. Hi, I'm Rachel Schneider, a 45-year-old office worker. My family has a long history tracing back to colonial times and is quite prominent in our community. Thanks to my late father's successful business, we now possess assets worth $9 million. Originally, my older brother was set to inherit the family estate, but he chose love over inheritance, opting to forego his rights to marry his girlfriend, who needed an heir for her family's wealth. This decision left me with the task of finding a spouse to carry on our family name. Despite my desire for independence and reluctance to rely on family wealth, I focused solely on my career, and before I knew it, I was in my mid-40s and still single. Realizing the urgency of continuing our family line, I decided to take action and attended a singles mixer. It was there that I met Kenny, my current husband. Surprisingly, he's 10 years younger than me, but at the event, he showed no interest in the younger women and approached me directly. "I'm not sure if you're okay with someone my age," I asked him multiple times. But Kenny gazed into my eyes and replied, "I'm a bit shy and not very assertive. I've always been attracted to older, more grounded women." Kenny's demeanor matched his words, gentle and reserved. I sensed he could bring a sense of calm to my family, which tends to be assertive. As our relationship blossomed, there was something important I needed to share with him. My mother had been ill and bedridden for the past year, and my sister-in-law, Catherine, and I were taking turns caring for her. Considering our age and the prospect of marriage, I struggled with how to reveal this to Kenny. Eventually, on our third date, I mustered the courage to tell him. To my relief, he not only accepted but also proposed, expressing his willingness to assist with caregiving. His kindness deeply moved me. At least, that's how I initially felt. Kenny works as a daycare teacher, but just 4 months into our marriage, he expressed a sudden desire to quit his job. When I inquired about the reason, he wore a remorseful expression and said, "Sorry, Rachel. The parents at the daycare are too demanding and complain a lot. I can't handle it anymore." It was evident that Kenny was struggling, appearing so timid. Normally, I would have encouraged him to persevere, but with him assisting in my mother's care and my pregnancy progressing, I remained silent. However, I soon began to regret my leniency. One day, as I exited the shower and approached the bedroom, I overheard Kenny whispering on the phone. What I heard left me shocked and unsettled. I managed to tie the knot without her suspecting a thing. I'm jobless. She bought my story about quitting work hook, line, and sinker. Little does she know, I ditched that job 2 years back. His conversation seemed directed at a friend on the other end of the line. A faint male voice responded, "You're quite the operator. Rachel's family is loaded, so I thought I hit the jackpot when I met her at that singles event. But let's face it, given her age, I was probably her only option. I felt duped. Was the sweet Kenny I fell for all an act?" I wanted to confront him right then and there, but the thought of the baby stopped me cold. With Kenny's true colors revealed, I began to doubt our future. Today, Catherine will be looking after my mom until 5:00 p.m. Then it's my turn. I debated whether to confide in someone about Kenny. That's when my brother's wife, Catherine, approached me. "Rachel, you seem troubled. If there's anything on your mind, feel free to share," Catherine said, her kindness evident, having cared for her own mother for years and now mine. She's really good with Mom too. So I confided in her about Kenny, and she listened attentively. "It's good you opened up. Keeping it to yourself could harm your unborn child," she reassured me. "Yeah, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Talking won't solve everything, but it does lighten the load. Still, this situation is quite something." Catherine looked genuinely concerned, almost as if it were her own problem. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Kenny walked in without waiting for an answer. Both of us were surprised, but Kenny acted as if nothing was wrong and smiled. "Rachel, I'll be helping with your mom's care from now on. You're not in the safe period yet, so I don't want you to strain yourself," Kenny said, playing the gentleman in front of me. "Really? Okay, let me show you how to care for her." "No, I'll learn from Catherine. You just rest at home." "Well, my brother's coming home early today, so we won't need her help." Upon hearing that, Catherine looked at me, shaking her head, as if to say, it's okay. She might confront Kenny and get the full story once I'm gone. With that in mind, I decided to leave it to her and head home. But I couldn't shake my worry, so I pretended to leave but hid nearby. Catherine tried to start a conversation with Kenny, but he beat her to it. "I've been meaning to ask, why are you taking care of your mother-in-law in this house?" he asked. using the same tone as on the phone. Well, my husband's busy, and Rachel has her job. But more importantly, why you ask? Then Kenny interrupted. What? And began hurling insults at Catherine. You live in such a wealthy home. You'd have enough money to put your mother-in-law in a care facility, wouldn't you? Or is it something else? Did your husband give up his claim to this family's wealth? So you're trying to curry favor by taking care of her? That must be it. You'd be pretty upset if you married into money and didn't get a piece of the inheritance, wouldn't you? It was cruel. I was furious too, ready to leave the room. But just as I was about to, Catherine, noticing me, signaled with her eyes to stay put. Reluctantly, I remained silent and watched the scene unfold. You've hit a nerve, haven't you? If that's the case, leave right now. This family's wealth belongs to my wife and me, so I'll handle my mother-in-law's care alone from now on. With Kenny's stern declaration, Catherine felt it was pointless to argue further and left the scene. Sensing the tension, I discreetly stepped outside, concerned about Catherine's feelings and wondering how to apologize to her. Kenny took over Mom's care entirely, refusing any assistance from me. He only provided basic instructions on caregiving. But his neglectful approach led to tragic consequences, and our mother passed away. The funeral took place at the church where generations of our family had been laid to rest. However, Kenny was nowhere to be found from the moment Mom passed away. Despite my attempts to locate him, I was too overwhelmed with funeral arrangements to pursue the matter. Relatives and neighbors were puzzled by his absence. Catherine, grief-stricken at the altar, apologized for trusting Kenny with Mom's care. Approaching her, I tried to offer some comfort. Catherine, please don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. Rachel, it's not your fault either. But where is that man? I wanted to confront him today, and he disappears just as Mom passes away. Exactly. And didn't Kenny often leave the house while he was supposed to be caring for Mom? Where was he going? Yes, neighbors mentioned he was frequently out, almost as if he wasn't caregiving at all, just loafing around. They also mentioned a big truck that came by once. What was that about? I wanted to ask, but with the funeral, I didn't bring it up. Days passed, and Kenny still hadn't returned. Then, I received a call from him. Hey Rachel, I'm in a fancy hotel in Europe, like the ones you see on TV travel shows. Kenny said nonchalantly. Kenny, you missed Mom's funeral, and now this. I spent $200,000. $200,000? Where did you get that kind of money? Remember the grand piano at our family home? I sold it. Who knew it was worth $200,000? Kenny confessed to selling the family's cherished grand piano and squandering the money on luxury travel in Europe. I never imagined Kenny would pull something like this while supposed to be caring for Mom. Our family home had tight security, but with family, it's different. That truck must have been there to move the piano. Why would you do something so selfish? The whole family was worried about you missing the funeral. Well, you know, once you have a kid, you won't have much free time. Since you have a job, I guess I'll have to be the stay-at-home dad. Kenny's words left me stunned. Despite my anger, his willingness to take on childcare was a silver lining. But it seemed he was aiming to live off me. Additionally, Kenny seemed to think the piano belonged to me. Confronting Kenny, who had unknowingly sold a piano and spent the money, I started with, my condolences. Huh. What do you mean? Kenny seemed bewildered, so I explained about the piano. That piano belonged to my grandfather, bought for my brother. So it still belongs to him. Oh, really? I'll just apologize to your brother then, Kenny replied, lacking any remorse for selling someone else's property. Kenny only met my brother at our wedding, so it's understandable he didn't know. My brother is a piano teacher and has loved the piano since childhood. He begged our grandfather for that specific piano. Although there's no room for it in his house now, it's still his. He even dreams of starting his own school with it. The piano means everything to him. I can only imagine what punishment he'll have for you when he hears it was sold without permission. By the way, my brother despises dishonesty. As I explained, Kenny remained silent. Understand? Mere compensation won't suffice when he finds out you sold his beloved piano. He's not one to compromise. I wonder what punishment awaits you. With that warning, the call abruptly ended. He's probably regretting it now. I called my brother and told him everything. Needless to say, he was furious. The next day, Kenny rushed home, finding everyone gathered in the living room. "What's going on? Why is everyone here?" Kenny asked nervously. "I heard everything from Rachel," my brother said sternly. "What possessed you to sell someone else's property, especially something so valuable, without consulting the family?" Kenny tried to justify himself, visibly shaken. I was just trying to pitch in with the household chores out of boredom. When I saw the old, large grand piano, I figured no one was using it anymore. So you decided to sell it. Yeah, it seemed like a waste to just leave it there. My brother, wearing a stern expression, pressed further. Really? That piano was special, imported by our grandfather from a top European manufacturer. Where's the money from the sale? As anticipated, my brother was playing his part well. Everyone probably knew Kenny had spent all the money on an overseas trip, but my brother was aiming for a confession in front of everyone. Kenny seemed lost in thought, struggling to come up with an excuse. The sales money. Yeah, it hasn't come in yet. Kenny stammered, clearly flustered, but my brother wasn't buying it. You're lying? How deceitful can you get? And what about those souvenirs from Europe in that huge suitcase? Kenny recoiled as if struck by lightning, closing his eyes in shame. I'm sorry, I spent all the money. Kenny's admission left the relatives murmuring in shock. Everyone knew the value of that grand piano. They couldn't fathom how Kenny could blow $200,000 on just one trip overseas. My brother, looking down at Kenny, lifted his chin with his hand, locking eyes with him as he said, "As Rachel probably told you, that piano was mine. Now that it's gone, you'll repay every penny. If you can't, I'll sue you for theft. Are we clear?" My brother's intensity was palpable, almost resembling a mob boss. While this would typically be a family matter, my brother was likely using intimidation tactics, knowing Kenny was clueless about the law. Predictably, Kenny lost his voice and began sweating profusely. Then, with a terrified glance at me, he pleaded, "Rachel, please help me." His voice was desperate, but I had no intention of intervening. This mess was entirely of his own making. When I rejected his plea, Kenny resorted to a ludicrous argument, saying, "Don't be so cold. I looked after your mom while you were pregnant. I saw the trip as a reward for myself after caregiving. Let's just say we both agreed to sell the piano this way. Since we're siblings, it can't be considered theft, right?" I was so dumbfounded that my mouth hung open, unable to form a response. It was Catherine who stepped in to defend me. "That's enough. Didn't you tell Rachel not to assist with caregiving? You even accused me of being after the inheritance and tried to push me away. Kenny, did you say such awful things to my wife too?" "Yes, I didn't want to worry you, so I kept quiet. But this man must have been scheming to sell the piano without letting Rachel and me near the family home." Catherine's words resonated with me, remembering how Kenny prevented me from getting close to the family home when he said he'd handle our parents alone. I reached the same conclusion. My brother's anger flared up once more. "Listen closely. My wife cared for Mom because she wanted her to stay out of a facility. She agreed out of kindness, not for money. First, apologize to my wife right now." With my brother grabbing Kenny by the collar, tears welled up in Kenny's eyes as he knelt before Catherine. "I'm so sorry, Catherine." Kenny's apology for his disrespectful behavior towards Catherine didn't soften the cold gazes of the relatives. Then, one of them shouted at Kenny, "You need to repay the money from the piano sale promptly. We can't tolerate a criminal in the Schneider family. It'll stain our name." Misinterpreting the situation once more, Kenny made another peculiar remark. "Exactly. We can't have a criminal in the family, right, bro? So let's keep calm. We'll work together as a couple to repay the debt gradually. Even my uncle was left speechless by Kenny's illogical response. Feeling that further discussion would be futile, I excused myself to retrieve something from my room. Ever since the phone incident, I had a divorce lawyer's business card ready. Kenny, call this number. I want our marriage to end. Let's handle things through legal channels. Kenny's face drained of color when he saw the business card I handed him. Why? We're expecting a baby. Why are you doing this? At that moment, I disclosed what Kenny had said to everyone on the phone. You heard that. It was just a joke. Do you think that's a valid excuse? I've known all along that you were after my inheritance. Everyone present glared at Kenny, realizing there was no way to justify his actions. Kenny responded with defiance, unwilling to admit his wrongdoing. Rachel, please, I need your help, Kenny pleaded in desperation. He explained that the buyer of the grand piano he sold wanted to return it and get a refund. When Kenny had sold the piano, he claimed it was in perfect condition. However, upon inspection, the buyer discovered a large engraving on the back indicating my brother's ownership. It seemed Kenny hadn't checked thoroughly. Instead of selling it through a reputable dealer, he likely chose a shady one enticed by offers like completely free, and now he faced the consequences. Kenny had to refund $200,000 to the buyer, a significant sum considering his debt to my brother. Despite Kenny's attempt to file for bankruptcy, my brother and I took legal action to prevent it. Now, burdened with more debt, Kenny worked tirelessly in manual labor. Eventually, the heirloom grand piano was safely returned. Relieved, my brother secured it with a strong lock and installed a security camera in the room, exercising caution. No one will touch that piano until I begin my piano lessons, my brother declared, unchanged from his childhood self, which brought a smile to my face. With his desire to start a piano school at our family home, I decided to discuss sharing our mother's inheritance. Feeling guilty for inheriting everything alone after Catherine's devoted care for our mother, I proposed the idea to my brother, who agreed. It ensured a positive relationship with his family in the future. And so, I welcomed a long-awaited baby girl. While some relatives hoped for an heir, I believe daughters tend to cherish their mothers longer in today's age. Besides, my mother, an only daughter herself, accepted a son-in-law, so if necessary, my daughter could do the same. Embracing single motherhood, I found unwavering support from Catherine, who had finished raising her own children. Grateful for her assistance during my mother's care, I felt deeply indebted to her. My brother eagerly volunteered to be a father figure for my daughter, his excitement palpable. Additionally, my brother and Catherine's 2 adult daughters, both kindergarten teachers, shared his passion for the piano, bonding with my daughter. Surrounded by such warmth and support, I felt immensely fortunate, and with gratitude, I resolved to face life's challenges head-on with my daughter by